Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Ravi. I'm the co-founder, CEO of Zeef. I would like to welcome you all. And this time on our talk series, we have one of the good friends and a known guy in the blockchain world, Gareth Beasley from New Zealand. Gareth is the co-founder, CEO of DComm blockchain. And I'll let Gareth speak more about him and DComm.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ravi. What an honor and a privilege to be interviewed by you, of all people, and have an opportunity to talk a little bit about, I guess, the topic of tokenization and DComm, less about myself, hopefully. I would say that I'm in the hierarchy of known individuals in the blockchain world. I'm slightly below yourself and David, but I aim to improve that ranking as time progresses and we get better at what we're doing. So, thanks for having me on the show. I was just mentioning before we started, I'm used to being on the other side of the screen and preparing the questions and reading the chat. And so it's a bit weird to sit this side and have to answer questions and I guess think on my feet a little bit more than I might be used to doing, but I'm excited at the opportunity. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Gareth. I'm originally from South Africa. I've been involved in technology my entire life. I actually had a meeting earlier on today with a tech company, and I'd said by the time I was 20 years old, I'd realized I didn't want to work for a boss. And I thought I'd give a crack at any good idea I had. And most of them were in the technology space. And the first 10 years of my career and existence were hard lessons and tough learnings taken out of business and various things. But you eventually get the gist of it and understand how technology flows. And for me, being involved mostly in database architecture my entire life, the natural progression that blockchain allows was very exciting. And even in my previous business here in New Zealand, where we designed pretty advanced analytics and database systems, the advent of blockchain was something I was trying to get that company into. And when the opportunity came to build out the DComm blockchain, specifically for asset tokenization and what the technology can do in that space, obviously I jumped at it. And it's been a really exponential learning curve. There's, a lot of experts in the field, and for me, it's been a pleasure learning from all of them, but also using the knowledge I've got in bringing DComm to a point where I think we've got a massive differentiator in around how we're going to do the business that we're doing. And maybe we can go into that a bit more detail further down in this chat today.
Oh, great to have you here. Today, the topic of the webinar is centered towards tokenization. And as we have seen in the last 2 years, we have seen the whole advent of NFTs, especially, when we talk about collectibles and now extending into music, videos, and various other kind of NFTs. And we saw a massive surge in different NFT projects that came in, initially starting with 10K avatar projects. And then, there were a lot of other creative projects that came in. And then, a point came when the supply was much more than the demand. And we saw the crash also last year. But during this time, one thing has been established about NFTs is that, it's a very sound technology to prove the ownership of an asset. And then, managing the transferability of an asset as compared to the traditional asset management. And we have also seen that, now people have started talking about, and not just talking, there are quite a few ventures who are working with tokenization of real world assets. And that include both fungible as well as non-fungible assets. So where do you, for what, according to you, how the things are moving when we talk about tokenization and specifically NFTs from collectibles to real world asset tokenization?
So for me, I kind of look at it, I wouldn't say cynically, but certainly with a different angle. And that I believe that the NFT market and how it originated obviously isn't the core purpose of what the NFT's capabilities are, because what its capabilities are extend extensively into smart contracts and proving ownership of a certain asset type. In the case of collectibles, it was digital art. But what it did was it enabled a lot of people that previously didn't have any experience in crypto or blockchain to actually understand the industry in a really easy to understand way. I own this piece of digital art. I can see it, I can feel it to a certain degree. And that opened up a whole new market where I think prior to NFTs, it was much more of a closed community just around crypto and maybe lots of different jargon in the industry. But so it's opened up a whole platform of people. And in doing so, it's opened up everyone's minds to the capabilities of what the NFT structure allows you to do. And then what it allows you to do is the technology side of things. And so it's morphing what's happening in a real asset world, and I'd say a real asset, and for me also extends into digital assets, not necessarily NFTs, and into the blockchain space. So blockchain as a technology rather than crypto as a currency. And so that's the part of it that I'm very interested in. And I feel that now that that's been opened up, became, I wouldn't say mainstream, but certainly it's talked about extensively. It's in the news. The merge was on the news last year when Ethereum merged. So it's opened up that opportunity for people to talk about what an NFT could do. And with the oversupply, as you've correctly stated, people have to look towards other opportunities. And so what is this market capable of doing? And for us as a company and for what DComm was trying to isolate in what we're doing is there is, without a shadow of a doubt, there's this traditional real world of asset types, and there's a lot of different asset classes that have almost extended their sell-by date in traditional finance models in the exact same way that Bitcoin disrupted the currency models. And now blockchain is going to allow the disruption of these traditional finance asset models into accessibility for regular people to hold investment into various asset classes. And NFT is the function between the two that governs how that will work. And as you know, there's lots of standards that you can use. There's lots of inherent functionality and parameters of data that exist in the NFT. And how you apply that actually starts to give it real world application. And I think what we need in the industry is solve real world problems, or at least provide real world solutions to a broader audience if we want to see adoption, if we want to see scale, if we want to see this industry grow outside of investors and retail customers and traders.
Nope, absolutely. I think that's a very interesting point. In fact, I know quite a few developers and people who have jumped into the blockchain world by buying an NFT. And that's the first time, they set up a MetaMask. They knew what a crypto gas is, how to buy tokens and then pay for the gas fee and buy an NFT and take the custody of it. And then, of course, sell the NFT on a secondary marketplace. So I think NFTs definitely on one end has played a major role in bringing a lot of people into the into the Web3 world. And second, as you rightly said, absolutely. And second, as you rightly said, that NFTs are enabling where one of the established use case, I would say, in the case of enterprises. We have been involved with enterprises for the last 5-6 years, and we've seen the growth or adoption of blockchain in enterprise has been very, very slow. But suddenly last 2 years with tokenization coming into picture, and we know that asset, pretty much touches every industry. And so there's a lot of traction among the enterprises. There are a lot of, in fact, production level implementations that have happened, whether it be financial assets or investment funds or commodities, etc. So so I think people are realizing that tokenization is a very powerful aspect of blockchain, and it can actually revolutionize the whole traditional finance industry.
Oh, without a doubt. As an example of just that topic point, which is, let's say, people talking about real-world asset tokenization, probably about a year and a half ago now, just excuse me, my Teams decided to jump up on me in my face, so I've just closed that off. I thought I'd do a little bit of research, and this is about a year and a half ago now. I was interested in the topic point, and I thought it will be interesting to see what Google thinks about how much searching has increased for the actual term real-world asset tokenization, and there's lots of tools that you can use to see what keywords are being searched and frequency and across which regions. And at that time, there was none, right? I couldn't even find any stats around real-world asset tokenization specific to blockchain. And if you did the same search now there's a lot. It's within 18 months, it's gone from people whispering in corridors to BlackRock talking about it outright, that the securities opportunity to tokenize on blockchain. is, an $18 trillion industry in of itself. So but I guess that also mimics the growth of technology and how, as soon as people understand and they unlock in their mind what it can do, then suddenly the world changes for them. And if they start thinking about it as a fad or a dark art, and they don't understand what's behind it, that's when there's obstacles. But I think we've passed that point where there's it doesn't have to be enterprise either, Dr. Ravi. So think about any company that's providing a product or service or owns assets that is actually doing well right now. Okay, so they're providing a good service, they're making a profit, they have a couple of shareholders. How do they expand that business? How do they go, cool, I want to franchise, I want to replicate, I want to grow, I want to make another branch in another city? It's a huge effort, to put a prospectus together, go out to an audience, follow the rules and regulations if you're going to document it properly in your specific region. Whereas you could fractionalize the ownership of a small percentage of your company, recapitalize, write out a memorandum of understanding of what you wanted to achieve with that, put that all on chain, make it the most trustworthy and transparent process that you could possibly imagine, get the buy-in of a global audience. And suddenly you find that companies can recapitalize, redeploy, and re-emerge stronger just by the fact of opening up this audience of new investors. And for those people, they've got now an ownership of an asset class where it would have literally been impossible to even know where to look before. So that's a really exciting opportunity globally for, from enterprise all the way down to, a regular business that's looking to expand upon the success they've already had.
So, yep, no doubt about that. I think access to larger liquidity from the owner perspective, and participation from retail, so that even individuals can participate in something which was beyond the reach, is one of the hallmark feature of tokenization of real world assets. Apart from this, if you see, there are of course distinct benefits provided by the technology itself. Like you can have absolute ownership. There's a proof of ownership, and we know that all the courts have been riddled with cases which are related to clear title of an asset. And I think NFTs and blockchain-based tokenization provides that. It provides a clear title of an asset. And then, once the asset has been transferred from one person to another, there's a clear, immutable audit trail of, where the asset is. So a complete asset lifecycle management can be enabled using blockchain. So what kind of, I know that DComm has been heavily working with a lot of different kind of tokenization use cases. So what typically are the different use cases or industries or asset categories that you are seeing where tokenization is happening as the low-hanging?
Well, there's low-hanging fruit, which is an equity market. And I think that's probably easy to deploy. But without a doubt, the most spoken about and approached even to us to accomplish is property. And so having a look at a property portfolios, be commercial or residential, but all under a portfolio banner. And there's actually a number of businesses worldwide that are executing on the regulatory compliance side of things so that they can prepare themselves to tokenize, which is really exciting. There's a group out of Australia that we're speaking with that's a significant sum in terms of an asset size to tokenize their portfolio. And then secondly, we kind of also looked at it from a social aspect and what can we do to enable meaningful contributions to how the world will evolve over and above tokenization as a subject as a whole. And so we're looking at renewable energy as a sector that we're seeing. We had identified prior to, let's say, quantifying what the outcome would be, that's something that we could provide meaning to. And then we went to market to discuss with those industry players that have got large-scale renewable energy plants, if this was something that they wanted to participate in, and it's been an overwhelming yes. So there's two real reasons there. One is the ability to recapitalize, add liquidity to their portfolio, and extend their renewable energy network. And the second is the production of carbon credits and working with carbon credit providers on a blockchain across the globe to provide a secondary income to that asset holder, which is good for the person who'd want to take ownership of this new asset class, if it's tokenized solar or tokenized wind. But you've suddenly got a yield from the production of the power, but also from the carbon credit consumption or issuance of the certification as a sort of byproduct of what they do. So those are the two areas I'd say that are the most spoken about, certainly within our sphere, and I'm not saying our sphere is everything. And then there's quite a lot around agriculture and commodities and specifically tokenizing the assets of supply chain. So, proving the asset class comes from somewhere, meets certain regulations and compliance is also quite an exciting area.
Nope. So I think equity, as you rightly mentioned, digital assets, because they are already digitized, so it's much easier to from the adoption perspective. Because if we talk about property, of course, it takes a long drawn,
very complicated
from a regulatory compliances. It's very complicated. So digital assets, and then two areas that I have seen, and some of the startups who are working with us are building is one on royalties and second on invoice tokenization. And and the idea is very clear that and I worked with the invoice discounting when we got into blockchain in 2017. That invoice discounting is a pretty cool financial product because it's easy to understand. It's something very similar to what we have cash discounting, and but the thing is, there's no secondary market today, and that's why the primary or the wholesale lenders, they are stuck with the portfolio that they have. And by tokenizing invoices, you're not just there are two major benefits which we saw. One benefit is that you lend more trust to the invoice, because with tokenization you can have the complete history behind the invoice. If you want to have purchase order, you want to have the proof of delivery, or you want to have proof of acceptance, what we call GRM. So everything can be embedded into the smart contract when you tokenize the invoice. And post that, once the invoice has been tokenized, you can actually take this portfolio and offload that into a secondary market. So it opens up a whole new liquidity, which was not there at all. So I see invoice discounting is there are a few startups who have already started doing it, and I see in the next 2 to 3 years, I think we'll see a major traction on the invoice discounting piece. And second, I think royalties, which is very easy to again, even with the collectibles, it was started where you can define a royalty percentage, 5 or 10% within the smart contract, and every time a secondary transaction of that NFT asset will take place, the NFT original creator or the owner will continue to get these royalties. And now just extend this use case into royalty as a concept which touches many industries. So this is another area which I'm seeing.
On that point, I think one of the things that we're missing in that particular example with NFTs is how the content's served. So where the content is located, and then how it's served to end users to actually maximize the royalties on it. So music would be a really good example. So for example, Spotify, if that were the place where the music is housed, but each time the content was served to the user and listened to or recorded or published or whatever the case may be, that's where the royalties were earned, and that could be built into the smart contract relatively easily. So where the content is and then how it's actually physically served to the end user, I reckon was the missing piece around a lot of the digital art, because it wasn't really housed anywhere. It was just an image that you owned in your wallet, but that's not where it was served from. And so you missed out, I think, on a ton of royalties every time it got used, or I guess it would be quite difficult, but if it were, let's say every time an Instagram post went up, that you go and get permission to utilize that image, then you could see a whole new market for NFTs as a collectible, and earning the royalties off of it. But those are, I think, simple, easy to understand use cases. But I wanted to go back one step, which is what I say we haven't really glossed over it, but haven't spoken about it at length, and that is proving the underlying asset and bringing that on chain, and to create that level of trustworthiness and transparency. And I think that piece is not been spoken about, and that piece is what we're focusing on too. And so the proof of asset protocol is an extremely important part in building up ultimate transparency and also setting benchmarks of what you can expect when you're going to go and investigate an asset that you might want to invest into and own a tokenized piece of. And so what you should be expecting is that there's full transparency across the board, for example, if it's a company, or the history of the security, or the history of the commodity, or the purchase order for the invoice. All of those details should be on chain. So that proof of asset protocol for us is a very important piece that we're actually developing as a microservice within our blockchain, that developers and developer communities that wanting to build out their own tokenization projects can remake use of, very similar to a SaaS software platform where you could integrate with various microservices and APIs to perform functions. You don't have to go and rebuild it. And so we're actually building that out with our partners through each instance where we're tokenizing various assets with the solar and renewable energy and property, and understanding what the different pieces of that proof of asset protocol looks like and how to deploy it on chain. And what that does is it opens up an interesting question, which is complexity of transaction. So as you'd know, there's three main standards that you could utilize for ERC to deploy smart contracts that have got an element of tokenization to them, and they actually vary in degrees of complexity. But when you start to go at the high end of the scale, and you do want that transparency, so you want the documentation, you want the audit, you want the appraisal, you want the third-party independent view of the asset, location, geography, KYC, AML, you can start rattling off a whole bunch of things that have to go with it. When you deploy the smart contract, it's got a lot of data in it. And if it's got a lot of data in it, it's going to cost a lot of money to deploy, unless you've absolutely decided that your foundation layer of how the blockchain functions is designed to handle that complexity. And I guess that's the unique bit of what DComm's managing and working towards, is providing these tools that developers can reuse, but having a foundation that understands there is going to be complexity, and the blockchain needs to be able to be predictive in cost to deploy these complex transactions. And so I think that proof of asset protocol is a super important bit around asset tokenization that I haven't yet seen other companies talking about very much, and that's something we've got a keen eye on for this year, ready to deploy at a high level.
No, I think you have touched upon the most important component when we talk about real world asset tokenization. And so since I've seen, how the tokenization was talked about 2-3 years back, and now, what we expect from the whole tokenization workflow. Earlier, when, some of the use cases were done on tokenization, they were pretty much like replicating the existing asset management workflow and putting that into blockchain. But those were all permissioned or private blockchains. And there was, the trust was based on a custodian, which is offline custodian. Now, when NFT DeFi came in, the expectation is altogether different, because DeFi is magically transforms the whole user experience. You simply connect the wallet, you can, you have the balance, you can make a transaction, there are no mistakes, there are no challenges. So now to replicate that into a real world asset tokenization is something more challenging, because here you're talking about real world assets, which has got some kind of offline custody. Now, how to bring that proof onto the chain so that, there's a clear, proof about the reserves which are there, the underlying reserves, and it should match with the tokens which are in the circulation. And we have seen after the FTX, in fact, crypto exchanges have also started talking about proof of reserves. So, so what can you tell us a bit about what exchanges have been talking about proof of reserves, that, exchanges should provide more transparency as to the underlying assets, how those assets are being deployed or stored?
Binance has led the way with the developed product of their own as custodial service, as well as proof of reserves. So all the exchanges are now looking at that as a must-have. And I think it should go a step further, though, as a proof of liability too, because having a set of assets without knowing what your liability book looks like isn't exactly transparent and clear. So yeah, I think from an exchange point of view, that should be what we as a community demand, that we need to know what the the asset exposure is like and the liability exposure before we can use those custodial services. We're directly dealing with some exchanges that are asking our development team to assist them in building proof of reserves protocol, because it matches up really closely to a proof of asset protocol. At the end of the day, it's bringing information on chain that was exclusively off chain. And the whole purpose really of blockchain is that I don't need to trust you. I just need to trust the data. And so if we form an agreement and then we put that agreement on chain, and the rest of the agreement exists on chain, then our trustworthiness needs to end there, right? And people change, people make decisions, people, change their minds and, don't maybe stick to their word all the time. But once you've engineered it into a smart contract and you've created the standard that you need to adhere to, and the expectations are to match that standard, then that's the level of trust I think we can expect at a proof of asset, proof of reserve. So I don't think we should go half-hearted and do just proof of asset, or rather, proof of asset rather for the exchanges, but proof of liability for me would be something that they should start exploring. And but even so far as tokenizing on the DComm blockchain and using that proof of asset protocol, we also want to, through our partnership development, almost set the AAA Standard & Poor's, rating, that people know what to expect when other companies come on, because we're also an open platform, or at least will be. And so that means that anyone can utilize and take use of the standards we're creating and products and services that we're providing and tokenize their asset, right? And so what's to stop somebody half-heartedly using proof of asset and kind of using zero knowledge proof and sort of decentralizing an oracle if you don't have standards that you set? So that's something we're focused on early on, is what does the gold standard look like? And so that when that secondary market we spoke about a bit earlier, or the primary issuance market is active, you're also going to inherently start to categorize these assets by authenticity and how much of that proof of asset protocol have they utilized. For example, you might have gone through the whole process, proved the asset to a degree of certainty that you can have trust in as on-chain, but do you have a quarterly report as part of that ongoing architecture, so that the token holders in the secondary market have got trust that what's being said and done to issue is now being maintained to have the asset continue holding its value over time. And I think when we start to look at property, for example, that will be very, very important, because as you know, property changes and tenants or how it's looked after or occupancy, those things all change over time quite quickly. So I think it'll be very important as a proof of ongoing asset as well as proof of asset.
Right. Yep. So apart from proof of asset, what are the other components that you are specifically you think is very important from a real world asset tokenization perspective?
So the next most important one would be a decentralized identification. And so in order to take ownership of certain asset classes in certain jurisdictions, there's going to be some regulatory compliance that says, I do actually need to know, in the case of property in Australia and in the registrar that's required, you do actually need to know what the person's name and address is. And so you want to bring in a decentralized identification product that can liaise with the certain government departments to provide them the information that they need, but not to provide them anything else that they don't need. Or in certain cases, just to provide them what's called zero knowledge proof, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And that's just a binary answer of a yes or a no. For example, if I were to purchase something here in New Zealand and I needed to have a certain status as a citizen or a resident, I could have easily had that plugged into our decentralized identification platform. I would know my criteria meets the fact that I'm a resident. And as a resident, I'm entitled to do certain things. And therefore, when the API calls it, it says, yes, Garrett's entitled to do these things. And therefore, I'm authenticated to even purchase that asset to begin with, because that KYC will become incredibly important. And it'll be different for different asset classes. And so the decentralized identification, and I say zero knowledge proof, but I think we're going to be calling it some knowledge proof, because I think is different asset classes do require that you do release some information. But it's for the individual to own the right to their information without anybody else, obviously cryptographically stored, and so that I can make the decisions about how I want my identification to be used. For example, right now I've got to send my passport in, like to check my age, and from that you can pretty much copy Gareth if you want and open some bank accounts and put me in debt further than what I already am. So, that becomes a very important part. Then thirdly to that is having a non-custodial wallet. So it's the ability to take the assets once you've got them from primary issuance and store them in a location that you're in charge of. And then what's coupled to that is the decentralized identification, because as I've discussed before, there's a 100% chance that somebody's going to acquire assets into, if we use a regular wallet infrastructure, not have any way to recoup the fact that they own the assets, they're the rightful owner, lose the keys to the wallet. Now I've got an awesome asset portfolio that I can't have access. And so we're also looking at how do we incorporate a bunch of different verifications and checks against somebody that has the legitimate right to own the asset. You would never be able to recover the wallet, but you could transfer the assets into a new wallet and then obviously restart your portfolio again without losing it. So that's also quite critical, I feel, in both securing persons' understanding that they own the assets and they won't lose them, as well as the fact of increasing adoption. Because I think the whole wallet thing is something that people battle to get past, and mnemonic seed phrase and private keys and pass keys and what have you. So we need to make that a little bit easier. And then of course we're dealing with real world assets. So there's going to be real world information, day-to-day information that changes on a daily basis, markets, influences, shares, etc. And so a decentralized oracle becomes something that is particularly important to have depending on the asset class. And so we'll be looking to do that over, I think, a slightly longer period of time, because it is quite a complex thing to put together. And we'll be bringing in various research assistants to help us formulate what that looks like. But again, with our partners that we're tokenizing for, we'll start to build elements of this out. But the cool part is everything I've described there is something that can be reused and deployed on the DComm blockchain, very tightly integrated into the DComm blockchain for development teams to be able to use. And because of the way that we're doing it, and the way that we're doing things, I can summarize as actions first, words later, is we'll be able to demonstrate how to tokenize things using our own tools with tutorials over the course of this year, so that people don't have to learn any hard lessons and they can go ahead and use our tool sets very easily.
Right. No, I think, so just to summarize, I think you've given a lot of information about different challenges of real world asset tokenization and how you're trying to take care of them. So one is decentralized KYC, which, as I understand, is where you combine your real world identity with cryptographic identity. So the way we are used to, connecting our MetaMask with the dApp and do a transaction. So pretty much using this decentralized KYC, where your real world identity is also attached to it. And then in the smart contract, there are a set of restrictions which will dictate as to, what a certain person can do or cannot. So if let's say an asset can be bought only by an Australian citizen or by an Indian citizen, based on your decentralized KYC, the smart contract will be, will allow or disallow a certain person to do a transaction.
And then the same applies to change of ownership.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, you mentioned about decentralized oracle, which, as we know, in the case of real world asset tokenization, there's regular appraisals that are required in some assets like real estate, etc. And then in any case, anybody who is doing any kind of transaction would like to know the current price or the market price of an asset that they are getting into. So having these price feeds and other data feeds in a very decentralized manner is something very important that can be enabled through decentralized oracles. And then, proof of asset, proof of reserves itself is very powerful, because people will not be able to trade into a token until unless they know that the underlying asset is well secured and they can trust on the token. So having a dashboard where they can see the underlying asset as well as the tokens in circulation, and they can see that they are well packed and there is no tempering of data, there is no movement of asset that has happened that is unauthorized. So if they get that kind of transparency, of course, they would be able to trust on the token, which is representing the asset.
Think about the share market as it exists today, and there's some applications you can buy shares in companies. And you would have read something on the news, maybe got an article, a mate told you about it, and so you buy some shares. What is the likelihood that the type of information that we're saying should become part of proof of asset exists in the acquisition of those shares? I'd say it's very low. I would say there's very few companies that you go onto their website and the type of information that we're saying should set the standard of authenticity is readily available to you to make those decisions with. You normally you've got to go through quite a few intermediaries and hoops and what have you to get access to that level of detail. And indeed, if it was even third party appraised, would you even have access to that ever? And I would say highly unlikely. So we're also looking at change in the game. And so my argument here is what I'm talking about, what you're talking about, is in fact of a higher trustworthiness to what the traditional finance model looks like today, because it's fully open. You say, well, there it is. That's the benchmark. And you either fit into that benchmark or you don't. But you start setting those kinds of high standards, then people are going to want to participate in this open market. And a lot more they will into a slightly more closed market where they haven't got a lot of confidence that what they're seeing is also the truth.
Right. Yep. So I think it seems that DComm is defining some of the standards in the real world asset tokenization that we are going to see in the next 2 to 5 years. So from a legal and regulatory perspective, where do you think we are? Are we closer to seeing some real world implementations of these tokenization use cases?
Yeah, absolutely. We're working closely with a group in Australia, and it's an entity, it's a legal entity that would formulate part of the proof of asset protocol. So part of that is compliance and regulations, because you also have to have the right to own the asset, as opposed to authenticating the asset exists. So the right to own it is defined by the corporate structure and what that corporate structure needs to do to adhere to the laws of the land in that particular case, and the specific vehicle that structure is put under in order to adhere to those rules. So we're dealing with a group who've, I'd say, prepared for tokenization between 5 and 10 use cases already of different assets entirely from all over the world, and to be tokenized through an Australian entity. So we're definitely close to being able to see some real world examples that really meet the compliance and are absolutely in line with the law. And so one of my co-founders, Brett, he kind of says it best all the time. He says, we already know the set of rules that we need to adhere to in order to tokenize assets, and it's called the law. And until the law changes, we need to work within the framework that already exists. And so this team of lawyers is doing so quite effectively. There's 2 different specific vehicles in Australia that can be used depending on what the asset class is. But that'll also be part of the on-chain information. So the right to own the asset, and therefore the right to exchange and trade it in the secondary market.
Got it.
And then it depends on jurisdiction too. So jurisdiction, asset type, I think are the 2 parts within that compliance regulation piece that will make a big difference. So that's why we picked partners really across the globe and through different asset classes, so we can start to identify what those look like. And part of that ecosystem we're building is also collaboration. And so being able to say, this is a collaborative pool of regulators and compliance and legals that you can also go to and say, I need my vehicle set up this way in order to meet the laws of this land, in order to tokenize the specific kind of asset. So it's also a process that needs to meet the laws. So we're not looking to try and be anonymous or skirt any laws and regulations that exist. We're wanting to work within the framework that exists today and any framework that might exist in the future. But we want to make it accessible to people and get rid of the intermediary steps and the bureaucracy and the difficulty to actually create the liquidity of that asset to the benefit of the asset owner and the future asset owner as a fractionalized owner.
Right. So absolutely. And I think one of the classic feature of DeFi is that, the smart contracts are composable. So you can combine them if you are following a certain standard, like if you talk about ERC20 standard or ERC721 standard. So these pieces are can be traded into one another, which is completely non-existent in the traditional finance. So I'm talking about where you are trading asset against asset. Now that is something that can be done, that can be affected by having these smart contracts and these composable components, which are very critical to new type of products that we are going to see, new kind of transactions, and that will open up the whole, whether it be accessibility of assets, whether it be liquidity of assets, and wider adoption among the people. So if I want to buy a share from US right now, it's a limited potential to do that, or not just US. If I want to buy some other country, there may not be any functionality while sitting in India. I would be able to do that. But once we tokenize the shares, then having an access to those tokens become very, very easy. So I think this will help asset owners to have larger participation from participants across the world, and at the same time, it will give accessibility to a lot of users to different kind of assets that they don't have today.
Also at the levels that people can interact with. So not everyone has got massive access to funds in the millions, where they can participate at the level that those individuals that do, or companies or entities do. And so actually it evens out the playing field a little bit too, and starts to provide the same opportunity to everybody, irregardless of the size of the funds they have at their disposal. Because you're not asking, it's not fund related or weight related, it's intent related. So do you intend to have an asset portfolio? And you can start to structure your own asset portfolio from very low risk to excessively high risk if you wanted to, across multiple different categories and verticals. So that's super exciting. Like we're working on the solar stuff quite a lot. And the very first meeting I had with this big solar company in the Middle East, I was like, okay, well, let's say as an example, I wanted to buy part of your company. How do I go about doing that? And everyone kind of just sat there like, well, I don't really know. And just think about how easy it would be, renewable energy marketplace. I could go pick whichever one I wanted. I'd have all the information about how it's doing, who their customers are, how much kilowatts they're generating, how many hours of sunlight they've got, how many carbon credits they've issued. And I'll be, okay, this is the risk portfolio I want to fit into. And suddenly it becomes fun, it becomes easy, accessible.
Right. No, I think this seems to be very interesting. So, Gareth, I would like to now open the house to any questions. So anyone has any questions, please put up the questions, raise hand, and we can take up those questions.
Just don't make them difficult. You put your own hand up.
I know. Yeah, just to show.
Okay. So anyone who's listening, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little raise hand button. You can click that and it should pop up on the thing. There's also a chat bot right at the bottom. If you click on chat, you can post questions to the panelists as well.
Yeah, so I think it doesn't seem we have any questions right now. So Gareth, anything you would like to add to any of the pieces related to tokenization?
Yeah, I think we've covered quite a lot today, and I don't want to overwhelm anybody with too much information, but something I guess I'd like to leave with is that as a blockchain, our focus is asset tokenization. And so when it comes to decision making about our platform and about our services, we've only got to ask ourselves one question, and that is it going to be better for the companies that are tokenizing their assets? Is it going to be better for the community that are acquiring those tokenized assets for us to do? And if the answer is yes, we will do it. And it doesn't have to complicate our relationship with our community and be pulled in multiple directions to try and please everybody. So we're making the absolute best blockchain that can possibly be made for the specific purpose of asset tokenization, whilst still being open and able for developers to use for any application that's got transactional nature to it. But we'll focus specifically on asset tokenization. I see someone has put their hand up, so.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent thought. Yeah, so if you can put in the question in the chat.
Oh, it's got a Q&A. Cool.
Yeah, I think Bhaskar has raised his hand. Okay.
Oh yeah. So first question you asked, can you please explain the impact of tokenization in carbon markets? So you'll be very pleased to learn that as of 2 days ago, DComm has signed a partnership agreement with an ESG tokenized platform. So tokenizing ESG credits and producing a proof of asset protocol of their own called proof of environment. And so the impact of it is being able to quantify and verify the certification and the origin and authenticity of the various types of, I would say carbon is one of the ESG's credits that you could possibly have, but to give it a greater degree of transparency and trust that what you're purchasing and trading actually meets the gold standard, actually meets the requirements of being a genuine carbon credit. And then having it in a marketplace starts to have the value of what that carbon credit is defined by the people who want to offset, use, or store it, rather than another value altogether. So I think the tokenization of carbon in that particular instance starts to put the power into the community, who are the ones who are wanting to trade or use it, rather than the issuer. And the issuer needs to meet certain criteria, which always on chain, which is obviously of very high trustworthiness.
I hope that answers the question. And then, we have a question about data or bandwidth tokenization. Yep. So tokenization is definitely there. So if you see some of the use cases like decentralized cloud or decentralized data, so there are various protocols where, people are, the community, they are providing their idle storage or their bandwidth. So it's like as a proxy, it's like a tokenization, and they are being incentivized in the form of tokens to provide that data or storage, a bandwidth or storage. And so this is definitely there. Now, as to how it's to be done, so one use case which I've mentioned, that the way people are creating a network where on one side you have consumers who are looking for compute or bandwidth or storage, and on the other side you have there are people who have got idle storage or compute that they can provide. And this is how the whole incentive model works, where the providers are given the incentive and the consumers are paying for it. So that is one way of creating such a marketplace where you can tokenize the data or bandwidth.
I think what's incredibly important in that scenario is the quality of the idle storage. And so, what is it, where is it, what's it connected to? And that would need to all be on chain. So you can rate the value of what that data storage system or bandwidth even might look like. What was its uptime? What is the uptime over the last 90 days? Those types of things, where if I'm a consumer and I'm looking for storage location in a decentralized way, I certainly want to know those numbers before making a decision as to which set of tokenized assets I'd like to work with. So again, that goes back to the proof of asset. So what is the proof that various idle storage mechanism has met the requirements that I need as a consumer to make use of?
Right. And as a follow-up question... Yeah.
No, sorry, Dr. Ravi, carry on. As a follow-up question?
Yes, as a follow-up question, Varun has asked that whether this data, which has been packaged as a token, can be resold if it's locked to a particular device. So I don't think so. This is how I'm envisioning this. The way I'm envisioning is that, there's a marketplace where, like, I'll take an example of peer-to-peer power trading that we did 2-3 years back. We did some POCs and here with some of the DComms in India. So there needs to be a closed community. So let's say there's a society, and there are various solar panels through which solar energy is being trapped, and that is serving the society. And everybody, you have got smart meters, which is keeping a track of how much energy you are generating out of your own solar panels. And then, those units of electricity can then be traded using wallets among all the members of the society. So the point is, because there are certain things which are not that fluid, that it can be moved. So electricity will reside in the batteries. So you can give an access, but you cannot trade it like we trade other kind of assets. So the way it will work is like a marketplace where there are various people who are producers. Like in the case of electricity, there are producers, there are consumers, and there are prosumers who are using. I may be using part of the electricity I'm generating, and I'm able to sell the rest of it. So in the case of data also, this is how it is being envisioned.
Yeah, you couldn't sell it twice. So I mean, that's what you. Yeah. In those particular cases, you can't sell that twice. You can't sell the data and then resell the data because it's already been consumed. Right. And so the same thing with the electricity. But we're actually busy. We're at an early stage discussion about rooftop solar in Europe across residential area to do exactly what you've just described. And so it's a really exciting opportunity for communities to get involved, where whatever the excess is of the energy that they haven't used, to be put back into the grid, to tokenize that, and to be able to utilize those credits for various carbon credits that they want to issue. So we're kind of working through the framework, but that's quite an exciting opportunity where that's a good example of regular people being access to irregular things.
Right. Next we have a question from Christopher. Whether the company shares, if we tokenize them, are they tokenized as a token or an NFT? So, so there are various ways of looking at it. If there's a marketplace which is tokenizing various company shares, then I would say we use an NFT standard. But instead of using 721, where you are tokenizing just a single asset as an NFT, you can use 1155 standard, where you can have company metadata as one NFT, and then all the different shares of that company as various fungible tokens. So the individual shares of the company will be fungible to each other, but overall that share belongs to a specific unique company that will be an NFT. So I think ERC 721, instead of using that, you can use 1155 tokenized company shares. And I think as Gareth mentioned, this is one of the lowest hanging fruit today. There are already many organizations where tokens are being, shares are being tokenized, and in the blockchain terminology, they are called security tokens. We are tokenizing the shares of the company, and then you are making a whole tradable marketplace for them.
Yeah, I would say in Chris's question, both answers are true depending on application. And there's something else in between that too, where you as a token holder of various assets, given the correct development skills, there's nothing stopping you from combining multiple different tokens together to create your own NFT and be able to resell that into a secondary market of its own. So there's a whole new suite of things, like you said, interchanging different types of tokens together that has never been explored. And that could be really exciting. If you had your own top 40 index globally of various tokens that you owned, include that all into your own NFT and resell that as let's say, a derivative on steroids.
Right. So I think we can take just one last question. So there's a query by Ankush, not exactly related to asset or tokenization, but related to blockchain in the legal industry. So so I've got some use cases that I've worked with in the past. So one is, of course, the legal data record management. So data record management today is we don't see many implementations of that, but I think that's one of the very promising use case. We have seen some variants of it, like in the case of certifications, where we are seeing whether it be academic. It started with academic credentials, where you tokenize the credentials and those are being managed. I would not say NFT in that case. In the case of credentials, it will be more of a non-transferable tokens. But yes, you are tokenizing the asset, and you can give an access to your certificate. You can revoke the access. So you retain the control over the asset once you tokenize them. And then the same way, if you talk about other digital record management, I think that's going to be one of the very powerful use cases. There are various startups, like Ocean Protocol is one of the earliest startups working where creating data marketplaces. So legal, in the case of legal also, legal data record management is one of the interesting use case. There was one use case we did in Abu Dhabi with Ministry of Justice that was on power of attorney tokenization. And the whole idea is that today what happens is that you have a certificate. So power of attorney is also a certificate that you have. Now, wherever you use that certificate, to ensure that you are having a genuine certificate, it's an active, it's not expired, and it belongs to you. I need to go back to the court and take a copy of that certificate and match them manually. And you can extend this use case to various other use cases. Everywhere you have a maintenance certificate, you have a quality certificate. Every time you need to prove. So one is having the certificate, but then every time that certificate is required or produced, somebody has to prove that the certificate that you are carrying is a genuine certificate and it's active. Blockchain, obviates that need. The whole process of manual verification of a tokenized credential can be done immediately in real time. So these are a couple of use cases in the legal industry, but of course there are quite a few use cases. And if you have any more questions or any related questions, do write us. You can join our Telegram group, or you can connect me with on LinkedIn. Gareth is also pretty much available on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Telegram. So you can connect with us, ask your questions. We would be very happy to answer them.
Absolutely.
So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Gareth, for taking out time and having such a wonderful discussion. I think our audience benefited a lot. I'm sure they have understood what the promise of NFTs in blockchain is, how the real world assets are being tokenized, and we are going to see a huge drive in the next 3 to 5 years.
Without a doubt. Dr. Ravi, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Bye.